I'm Ashley Banfield. I want to welcome our viewers again around the country and all around the world, in fact, as this headline breaks today. It is 22 years since headlines were on every cable station, every news channel, and almost every single paper across this country that O.J. Simpson was the prime suspect in the murder of his ex-wife and her friend. And it was only 20 years plus ago that he was acquitted of those murders. And today, a knife now is being discussed by the LAPD as having been found after construction at O.J. Simpson's former estate, Rockingham Estate, in Brentwood, in the Brentwood area. The LAPD is heading to the live mics right now out in front of their headquarters in Los Angeles. Let's listen in.
Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Captain Andrew Nyman, N-E-I-M-A-N, LAPD Media Relations. So I'm here this morning to give you a little more information about stories that have been going around regarding a alleged knife that may have been recovered, possibly in connection to O.J. Simpson case. So this is what we know. Within the last month, LAPD became aware of an item that was allegedly recovered by a citizen at the Rockingham property, possibly during the demolition of the site. We need to vet that. We still don't know if that's an accurate account of how this item came into our possession. The actual item is described as a knife. I'm not going to go into the description of the knife because that could be germane to determining whether or not this actual piece of evidence is in fact evidence or it's just a facsimile or made-up story. So we need to look into that, and our robbery homicide is going to look into that. So what I can tell you is that the story as it's told to us by the person we received it from, and the person that we received this knife from is a retired LAPD officer who retired back in the late 90s. He was a motor officer, and at the time, according to him, he was working an off-duty, which is, he was working a moving job, which a lot of our officers do on an off-duty basis, as well as our retired officers. So I do not know whether he was retired at the time that he allegedly received this item from the person who claimed they found it on the property, or whether he was still in fact an LAPD officer and then retired sometime after that. So we are looking into that. The bottom line is that with all cases that remain open, such as the O.J. Simpson and other murder cases and robbery cases, unless there's an actual arrest or conviction to prove that we have actually closed the cases remain open. That is where we are with the O.J. Simpson case. And I shouldn't say the O.J. Simpson case. This is the Nicole Brown case. This is a double homicide that is still open and ongoing. So the investigators will continue to look at this. That item has been recovered by robbery homicide investigators. It is being treated as we would all evidence. So it has been submitted to our lab. They are going to study it and examine it for all forensics, including serology and DNA and hair samples, and that is ongoing as we speak. So with that, I can take a couple of questions, and I may not be able to answer all your questions. So let me start right here first.
Captain Mark Bester with Take 5.
Yes.
Just give us your reaction. If we know the allegations at this point, but your reaction to an officer with LAPD what many would describe as the biggest murder trial in all of LA's history. What's your reaction when you first reported that?
Well, I was really surprised. I would think that an LAPD officer, if this story is accurate as we're being told, would know that anytime you come into contact with evidence, that you should and shall submit that to investigators. So I don't know what the circumstances are why that didn't happen, or if that's entirely accurate, or if this whole story is possibly bogus from the get-go, involving a variety of people. So we're looking into that, but I was quite shocked. So in terms of charges, the officer is retired. So in terms of administrative charges with the department, we'll look into that, but at this point, I don't believe there are any administrative charges that could be filed because he's no longer an employee of the department. In terms of criminal allegations, robbery, homicide, and our investigators will look into if there are any potentiality of criminal charges related to this. So
describe the knife, the condition it was in, how long the knife is, if you found anything on it, possibly dried blood.
Yeah, I don't have that information, and the investigators have asked that we not be very descriptive about the knife. So they haven't actually told me, so I don't accidentally tell you. And for obvious reasons. We need to, one, first of all, determine, is this evidence? And if it's not evidence, how do we prove one way or another that it's not? And the only way we could do that is by being able to challenge the people involved as to where it was recovered, how long it was, where it was alleged to have been, etc.
Can we at least say whether or not, though, it was a machete or a kitchen knife or a pen knife?
It's my understanding that it is a knife, so it's not a machete. So.
I mean, does double jeopardy apply here? I mean, could OJ be tried, even if retried, even if incriminating evidence like DNA evidence was found on the knife?
So my understanding, I'm not an attorney, but it's my understanding from being a police officer for nearly 30 years that double jeopardy would be in place here. So we could not charge Mr. Simpson with the homicides that he's already been charged with because he's been acquitted.
How long will the investigation of the forensics take?
It depends. It depends what kind of evidence they are able to glean from the item. But that we are working on that, and obviously there's a lot of attention to this. So we are interested in finding out as quickly as possible so we can put this story to rest or confirm something.
You guys plan on reaching out to OJ? Can you describe how he got the knife and how he turned it over?
So as I'm told, the off-duty or retired officer was working in the area of the Rockingham estate. And he claimed that an individual who claimed to be a construction worker provided him with this knife, claiming that it was found on the property. So he held on to it until just recently when we discovered that he had it, and we have now recovered it within the last month.
Do you guys plan on reaching out to OJ at all?
Do we? That may be part of the investigation, but I don't know.
Do you plan to go back to the property and do any further investigations back at his estate?
There will be plenty of additional investigation. I don't know where that will lead our investigators. Now, that property, as many of you know, has been demolished and rebuilt, so I don't know if they will be going back there, but certainly they will look into all options. Let me go over here.
What year was the knife recovered?
Yeah, we're not going to provide the exact dates because, again, that could go to our investigators either proving or disproving the legitimacy of this item and where it came from and who was involved.
Where exactly on the property was it found?
I don't know that.
Was it the only knife that's ever been recovered, or have other knives been turned in by the public on this?
Yeah, I don't have that information. I'm sorry.
What's his explanation for holding it?
It's my understanding that he believed that the case was closed, which again is a possibility that he had that misunderstanding. So again, as I explained at the beginning, any case that is not where we don't have a conviction on all of the charges, or we're not able to prove to our satisfaction that we have proved the facts of the case, remains an open case, and that is the case here.
He's an LAPD officer. He didn't know to turn it in?
I don't know what his statement is. That's the information I have at this time, so I'm sure we will look into that further.
Are you releasing the name of the officer?
We are not releasing his name at this time.
Do you know the name of the person who found the knife initially?
We don't. So we will be looking for that. So I would ask the public, so if you're seeing this story and you believe you are that individual that provided this knife, we would love to have you contact our robbery homicide division, and we would get more information from you then.
Is there a possible obstruction of justice by not turning the knife in?
Yeah, I don't know that. We will certainly look into any potentiality of any criminal charges that may be involved here.
Is it true that he tried to turn in the knife at one point? The investigators told him it was worthless.
I don't know that. Yeah.
Captain, how much does DNA evidence degrade over time? Is it possible if there's anything useful on it?
Yeah, I'm not a forensic expert, but it's my understanding that depending on where an item is kept and how it's stored and maintained, that it's possible to get DNA, I mean, look at what we do forensically with our natural history, discovery of items that are very old. So we're hopeful if this is involved, our investigators will submit it to the labs that are very good at what they do, and we'll see.
How was the story?
I don't know.
How long are you guys looking at until after the testing that you guys start to see any type of DNA analysis?
Well, it depends on the type of testing and the condition of the forensics if we discover any forensics. So there's a lot of processes, and again, I'm not a scientist, so we have folks that are experts in that, and they will do everything in their power to maintain that and produce anything that is producible.
Apologies if you already mentioned this, but could you talk about how LAPD found about this right now?
So it was brought to our attention that this retired officer had an item that was believed to or alleged to be possibly taken from or recovered from the Rockingham estate back in the 90s. And that's how, once we learned about that, we followed up and recovered it from him. I don't know how the contact was made, but we discovered it, and our investigators immediately followed up on that.
Can you tell us what the report is of how the knife was found? Was it buried? Was it sealed in the wall? What sort of thing?
That I don't know. I don't know where it was recovered or how it was reported to have been recovered.
Are any of the original case detectives on it?
Well, when a case remains open, it is handed off to a special team, our open case team, and that is who has it at robbery homicide. So they would not have been the original investigators on this case. And that happens in many cases that go on for years. We have, a number of cases that are still open, from decades ago, where the officers and investigators are certainly retired by now. So, last question.
Can you clarify if you could? The retired officer, was he retired back at the time he received the item?
We're still trying. I don't have that information. We're trying to determine that, what his status was when the item was allegedly handed to him, whether he was in fact retired or retired shortly after that. All I can tell you is that he did retire in the late 90s. So, and I'm not sure when this item came into his possession.
He was working a movie shift?
He was a lot of our officers work. You see them around the community in Los Angeles and elsewhere. Typically, they're on LAPD motors, or not LAPD motorcycles. They work on movie bikes that look like LAPD officers, and they are in LAPD uniforms. That is by an agreement with the city and with the department that they work those jobs for traffic safety, for the safety of the public. So it's my understanding he was working one of those jobs as a motor officer for the movie job. So he would, in any case, be off duty, whether he was retired or still employed by LAP, but in an off-duty capacity.
What's his name?
We're not providing his name at this time. Okay, thank you very much.
And with that, Captain Andrew Neiman wraps up a very quick ad hoc news conference at the LAPD headquarters because the stories are swirling about this knife that was found at the O.J. Simpson estate. Here's what he confirmed for us, that it's been about a month since the LAPD has had this knife in its possession. It came from a citizen, but there were two citizens involved in this find. One was a construction worker who was working on a demolition at O.J. Simpson's former Rockingham estate in the Brentwood area of Los Angeles. That person apparently turned over that knife to an LAPD officer. Whether that officer was retired at that time or not is still in question, but that officer is retired now. Something else we don't know: how long ago did this happen? There have been stories that it has been years, but the detective who gave that news conference said that is actually part of identifying whether this is actually a hoax or not. So we know that the construction worker handed the knife over to this detective who was working an actual job, but not officially on the force at that moment. Then we know that this motor officer handed it over to the LAPD all within the last month. And we also know this, as if we'd forgotten. This case, according to the LAPD, is not called the O.J. Simpson case. This is called the Nicole Brown Simpson Ron Goldman case. And it is still a double homicide investigation. It is still an open case. They leave these open until there's a conviction or something to lead that the case is proven. This one, according to the LAPD, is certainly far from that. So currently, robbery and homicide investigators are in possession of this knife. They have it. They're sending it to the lab for forensic analysis, which will include serology, DNA analysis, and hair sampling as well. Not to suggest that there were hair samples connected to that knife, but this is all pro forma. As far as this officer who may have had this knife for some time before turning it over to active officers. It is unclear as to whether he will be criminally charged in connection with this, and it's also unclear whether there will be administrative charges against him, because we don't know at this time whether he was still a part of the force. He is not currently now part of the force. I want to bring in Tom Lang, who was the lead detective in the O.J. Simpson murder case. He also wrote a book about the case called Evidence Dismissed. Detective Lang, I know you're retired now, but I'm sure that this case haunts you, as it does so many. What do you make of this news today of a knife being discovered and being in the possession of the LAPD?
Well, these things continue to happen from time to time. I think you have to try to keep this in perspective. This knife apparently was recovered some 18 years ago, around the time where several other knives in and around the properties were recovered and turned over by people. The circumstances here of this initial recovery are unclear. We don't know what happened. I mean, it's talking about something that happened 18 years ago. I mean, where do you begin? The LAPD has it. They'll check to see if what type of knife we have. They'll see if it's dimensionally consistent with the wounds on the victims, which is very important. Of course, they'll check for any fiber evidence or prints on it, DNA, these types of things. Take the handle off, completely strip it down, and see if there's anything at all of evidentiary value. If it is, then they'll go from there. The reality, however, is that these things have been happening for some time, that there are many, many knives that have been turned over. And again, we just don't know at this point until they get into this, and they do all of these various tests, and then they take it from there.
Detective Lang, I do want to ask you this. I know that this is sort of, this has been a case that has been talked about, argued, fought over. It split the country for quite some time. I think it still splits factions of the country. And it was hard on the LAPD as well. You took a hammering in that courtroom. The officers accused of jury rigging evidence, planting evidence. The officers accused of racism as well, involved in the investigation of O.J. Simpson. If this knife proves to be something, it will not lead to anything regarding a criminal prosecution of O.J. Simpson. As Yale Galanter said, that ship has attached. He cannot be charged again for murder. He's been acquitted. But what would it do in terms of vindication for the LAPD and the officers involved?
Well, as far as vindication, I honestly don't see where there needs to be a vindication under most of those circumstances that you described. If evidence was planted, there would be evidence of that. We have even recent accusations by people like Alan Dershowitz that my partner, my late partner in this case, had planted evidence, although there's no evidence that that ever occurred. This nonsense about racism, this was not a case about racism. This was a case about two young people being brutally slaughtered, and the media running off with this thing and trying to say that, oh, it's the racist LAPD and it's this, that, and the other. This is all nonsense. If any of this stuff could be proven, we would have seen that evidence at court. All you had was nonsense thrown out by the defense during this trial about the cops this, the cops that. There was never any evidence at all that anything was planted.
Do you take any solace at all that O.J. Simpson currently cools his heels in a lockup based on the kidnapping and robbery conviction in Nevada, maybe actually watching us right now from the common room that sometimes has the TV on CNN?
Well, I don't take solace in any of this. I don't get personally involved in this. But when I am attacked and falsely accused of something, when my partner is attacked and falsely accused of something, I will defend it. This case, it was all nonsense to begin with. So you can't live with these things. These things are going to happen all the time. I honestly believe the media wants to keep the thing out there. There are no unanswered questions in this case. There's nothing exculpatory of any substance in this case, and there never has been.
You know, you just heard the captain who took the microphone, Captain Andrew Neiman, say that he's not a lawyer, but he knows full well there can't be any further prosecution of O.J. Simpson. But would it be enough if there was some kind of proof just for posterity's sake?
Well, I don't know. You can't worry about posterity's sake if you're running a criminal investigation. There was so much evidence put on, inculpatory evidence. I mean, I have never heard of any case in some 300 murder investigations I've been involved with. Nothing ever comes close to the amount of evidence in this case. And again, what any investigator is going to look for is something exculpatory. Once you know that, you can only strengthen your investigation. This was one of the very, very rare cases that had nothing of a substantive nature.
Detective Lang, have I lost you? Can you still hear me? I know we had a troublesome connection.
Still here.
You still there?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, continue. I lost your last sentence.
Okay, no, I'm just saying that this was one of the very rare cases that there was actually nothing of a substantive nature that was exculpatory. Everything points in one direction, so lack of evidence was never a problem in this case.
And I just want to ask you about that statement, lack of evidence. I'm sure that there was a lot of hand-wringing among your team, you being the lead investigator, the lead detective of the LAPD in the OJ case. I'm sure that it frustrated you to no end that you had to deliver your evidence and all of those pieces of evidence that went by this jury without the murder weapon. I just wanted to ask you, did you turn that estate upside down? Do you think there's a chance that it could have been missed if it were buried out in a yard? What kind of investigation did go on to determine whether there was a murder weapon anywhere at that Rockingham estate?
There were several Albany investigations. We did everything possible we could at that Rockingham location. Again, where the glove was found, it's a very narrow area behind the bungalows. It goes back to an area where there was a lot of junk that had been discarded. We felt that Simpson at the time was trying to get back to that area there to perhaps discard evidence, and that's where the glove was found. I don't believe that he went beyond that location because he ran into an air conditioner. There were cobwebs beyond that, indicating that no one had been back in that area for a while. Then you switched to the airport, where we had a witness that actually observed Simpson get out of the limousine and deposit items in one of the trash containers right there at American Airlines from a small half-moon-shaped travel bag that he had on top of the trash container. He was taking items out and putting them into that container, bag up, and walked inside, and that's the last we saw of that little travel bag. There's certainly a probability in my mind that there was evidence that he deposited in that container.
Detective Lang, I appreciate the time that you took to speak with us. I'm sure this came as a surprise to you as it did to us, but we appreciate your insight, and we'll continue to follow this and hopefully speak with you again if and when we have some resolution, sir.
Sure.
Detective Tom Lang, retired, but the lead detective in the O.J. Simpson murder investigation on behalf of the LAPD, that same police department taking to the microphones just moments ago to say it is true. The stories that have been told over the years are true, at least part anyway, that the LAPD has a knife in its possession. It was turned over to them in the last month, and they are testing it. They are doing the forensics to try to determine if the knife that came from the Rockingham estate of O.J. Simpson 22 years ago, a murder was committed. Was it the murder weapon? More after this.